Hello, my name is Hannah Johnston, and I'm doing option 2 for the final CRE in Dr. Hernandez's class. So, the question is, if I were wrongfully convicted and still set to be executed, what would I want people to know about my experience? I'm assuming that means life experience. And I guess to insert some positionality, like at the end of the day, I'm a white, middle class, soon to be officially college educated person. So I really, genuinely, I don't ever see a world where I would ever be put in a place where I would commit a crime that could be punished via capital punishment. So there's that. More positionality before I try to answer that. I also would kind of agree with what we talked about in class on November 21st, like the quote from George Orwell, that most people approve of capital punishment, but most people wouldn't do the hangman's job. After reading what we read, the article In the Face of Death, if I was on the other side of things, I think I would react similar to those jurors. Like, yeah, on paper, I think the death penalty is totally fine. But also only for very specific scenarios. So I guess, hypothetically, it's so gross to think about. If hypothetically I was a mass shooter, kill me. I think that would be a totally reasonable punishment, actually. And if you can make me suffer, I think that would be best for everyone. If I were to do something like the person in the news article that we read, that talked about all the jurors and stuff, I think I would want jurors to know exactly what they ended up knowing about that case, which was that person's life experience. Because obviously in my 4 years of sociology classes, I know that life experience, the setting in which a child grows up and the stressors that are put upon them, as well as the opportunities to learn from mistakes, it determines how they're socialized. Editing Hannah here, I also pulled my knowledge of that from the TED Talk that was titled Lessons from Death Row, I believe, in the course media. So I guess assuming that there were lots of social factors like coming into contact with the juvenile justice system, and in the ways that I did that, I would want jurors to know that. Obviously, wrongful imprisonment in the life I wanted to live, probably I would want people to know about that, especially if it was wrongful. Like, if I was determined to no longer be guilty, I need that to be said first. And obviously, if the jurors have time, if there's no time limit on the mitigation specialist. What are we talking about? 24th. That's when we talked about it. So when we talked about mitigation specialist on the 24th, if y'all got time, I'm gonna fill it. So I'd want you to definitely know my thoughts on the death penalty. If there was a way to interject that, how I feel. Not about the crime that I committed, but about how I feel about the punishment. I think that I would also want jurors to have information that wasn't like pseudoscience. Like, we know for a fact that lie detector tests are false. We know that eyewitness accounts are not great. They have a place, but they cannot be a defining factor in someone's guilt. So I would also want jurors to be aware of that. If there are eyewitness accounts, I need you to throw some statistics behind it too, because most people aren't college educated on these things. I wouldn't expect them to be able to come to the table with that knowledge. We also saw in our course media with the article titled Texas Almost Executed a Man Based on Junk Science, His Ordeal Isn't Over. We saw in that article that the person's mental state was autistic, and they were using outdated, like, science beliefs. Shaken baby syndrome isn't apparently viewed like that anymore, which I did not know, actually, myself. So I think that presenting information to the jury of clear science, even maybe addressing, like, for example, in that case with the shaken baby syndrome stuff, like, maybe presenting to the jury that this is what was believed at the time, but here's what we know now, just so they come to it with the same frame of reference. But another thing I guess I would want people to know if I was wrongfully convicted would be things that would allow me to set up a countersuit once I got out of prison. So I guess a lot of it would have been things like how the prison sentence had affected me or affected my family. I also think that I would want people to use me as a pawn for their activism in the realm of death row and wrongful convictions. So I would want to do things and say things that put me as a, let's say I am on death row, wrongfully convicted, and I'm still set to be executed at this very moment in my life. As a 22-year-old, white, college-educated, middle class, like, I would want my situation to be if this can happen to me, who had essentially the most perfect circumstances besides probably being a woman, like, who else could these things be happening to? Because I would want my situation to be one that could be used for reform. Because at the end of the day, I think the death row, death penalty, whole legal landscape can use a lot of reform. Okay, so now for the compare and contrast section. So I decided to interview my mom and my coworker at the rec center. And my mom is obviously my mom, but my coworker is also college student, A&M, working on his undergrad. So for his positionality, we're similar in the sense of our current set of circumstances, but obviously he's a man, I'm a woman. And surprisingly, we all kind of responded the same way. I filmed my part before I interviewed them so that my thoughts and feelings wouldn't be changed by their thoughts and feelings, but we really all answered the same thing. My mom specifically mentioned the Innocence Project and how she would want to take part in that if she could. And my coworker mentioned how if he was in this situation, he would want to just make sure his story was straight. And that maybe use the media as a pawn for his situation. And I thought it was super interesting that he was describing things like making sure your story's straight, pulling on the heartstrings of the jurors, like things that a mitigation specialist would do, but he's an engineer and he had no idea that was a thing. Like, we talked after I turned the camera off, and I also mentioned the Innocence Project. He had no idea what that was. And we talked about off camera, like, well, would you go to financial ruin if it meant that you could have a chance at getting off death row? He's like, well, I wouldn't go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, but I'd certainly consider spending money on making sure I had bulletproof legal representation and stuff like that. And then my mom, she echoed similar sentiments, pretty much similar sentiments that I already had, which I was kind of shocked about because I had fully assumed she'd be like, well, I'm on death row, so clearly you thought I did something wrong. But I also found out she is kind of anti-death penalty, which I also found interesting because that was not the answer I was expecting.